Well, from listening to Richard Morrow talking about how not to get burned in the gold rush, we are going to head off to Argentina and Challenger Exploration. ASX code, ladies and gentlemen, CEL. Write it down. This is an exciting story. Here to tell us all about it is the CEO and Managing Director, Chris Knorr. Chris, over to you. You've got big news coming out at the moment.
Thank you very much for having me. That's our key project, the one I'll talk about most up there on the screen. That's Hualilan in Argentina. And in the old Argentinian language, Hualilan actually means mountain of gold, which is what we think we're onto over there. And what you can't see off shot there is the double lane sealed highway just to the left, and also a transnational power grid being put in as well, which, so great logistics. They're only 1,000 metres above sea level. Quick snapshot of Challenger, 2 projects. The key is Hualilan, or lead is Hualilan, 600 odd thousand ounces. Now that historical resource grade of 13.5 isn't real. This is some of the worst technical work we'd seen. The real number's about 10 grams gold equivalent, but it is open in all directions and going to get a whole lot bigger. And then we've basically in the last month came across a big intrusion hosted system sitting underneath with results over 100 metres at over a gram, which will add a lot to that. 5 rigs going on at the moment in Argentina, scoping out the project. In Ecuador, we're southern Ecuador, and we sit about 5 Ks from a 17 million ounce ore body that's going through permitting. So really we're effectively sitting there doing some work, but waiting for that to get permitted. Experienced board, we've all taken companies from a startup to $1 billion exit, and that's the plan here. And over 19 million in cash. We're burning it with 5 rigs going. We're spending 1.2 a month, but you won't see capital raising out of us for at least 12 months until hopefully we've doubled the current share price. I'll kick straight into Hualilan in Argentina. That's just a cross-section showing you the project on the right. The key to the project is probably that first hole we drilled. That's 6 metres at 34.6 grams. That's a twin of an old Canadian hole that got 4 metres at about 4. And what the Canadians didn't realise was if you didn't get almost 100% core recovery, you washed out the sulfides and you washed out the gold. So, we're not smarter than they were. We're just we've worked out the drilling, and we're drilling underneath and outside of holes they thought had closed it off. And we're getting, typical intercepts of 5 to 10 metres at 5 to 15 grams gold. We're sitting on granted mining leases, and we're redoing the metallurgical test work now. The old network 20 years ago, they were getting 80% recoveries. And we think with modern technology, we'll do a bit better than that. We'll have something out on that hopefully in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Chris, can I just jump in then? With the Canadians, did they hold the project for a long time? They just didn't understand what they had and they let it go? How did you come across it?
So look, the Canadians were there in 2005 to 2006. And for some reason, they structured their deal with a $20 million debenture attached. And because after they started to get some decent results, the Argentinians said, well, thank you, where's our 20 million? The thing degenerated into an absolute mess. It was in court, and then basically it got split up and sat there for the past 15 years. The 2 owners wouldn't talk to each other. And, really we came in as a circuit breaker, did a deal with both parties without telling either party, put, the 2 halves together, and all of a sudden you've got critical mass in a project that's been pretty well known. And a lot of majors have had a crack at putting it together. I think I've just got more patience than most people because it took us almost a year to do it.
Any legacy issues from that, Chris?
Only legacy is we sit on granted mining leases, which is a nice legacy to have.
Okay.
And look, this is the high-grade mineralisation in 3D, and it's really the Magnata vein and the Sanchez vein. They're fault controlled. They're the key of the whole system. They're these big basin-wide faults. They go for 20 Ks. You stand on top of the hill, you can see them. You've had this intrusive source at depth. The mineralisation has come up these faults and formed fairly continuous veins. They're 5 to 10 metres wide. We've now stepped them out along strike over a couple of 100 metres, so they're defined over 400 or 500 metres. We've stepped them down dip a couple of 100 metres, and then you've got these, they call them manto bodies. It's effectively within limestone. The fluid comes up the faults and replaces the limestone with these massive sulfide lenses. And we've sort of pushed these things all together as well. We've stepped it out along strike a couple of 100 metres. We've got some interesting holes that we put out 2 or 3 days ago down here in the middle that look like this high grade's extending over this, we call it the gap zone. And effectively what you've got here is you've got this high grade system open everywhere. The Canadians, they're a junior putting a bunch of holes under shafts and adits, just chasing assay results. And really this thing has just been crying out for a pattern step out drilling program, which is what we're doing. You know, where does it land? Look, it's certainly going to land a lot more than 600,000 ounces. I mean, the center of the system is down here in the south, at outcrops 500 meters further south. So, you know, it's a big system, open everywhere, and going to get a whole lot bigger. And then the second leg is the intrusion hosted system. So you can see the same high grade gold loads there. And then the purple are the intrusions as we defined them about a month ago before we started drilling them. You know, it looks like, you know, we thought these blobs would join up. We've got a hole at either end of this, you know, 1 kilometre zone where we've got, you know, about 100 metres at a gram, another hole 500 metres further south. You know, we've sort of done some first drilling into that system, you know, got some fantastic results, which I'll talk about a bit later, 39 metres at 5, a couple of holes well over 100 metres of mineralisation. So they're the two legs to the system. And I'll quickly touch on some of the results we put out, you know, 3 days ago, which are really exciting. Those first couple of holes there, 5 metres at 12 and 4 metres at 12, they're right down in the centre of the system. They were stepping out either side of a single hole we'd put in the middle of the two loads that went 8 metres at 5. And, you know, what that has effectively shown is that there is high-grade mineralisation right down between these two loads. So we potentially double up the strike length and we go from, you know, almost a kilometre of mineralisation to 2, which is those 3 holes. It's just a lack of drilling. And the blue holes there are follow-up holes we're waiting for assays on. So as you can see, there's a lot of news flow to come. And then really, you know, another hole, we've got 3 metres at sort of 7, 4 metres at 6, and some old workings underneath this Sanchez fault, which is a big east-west structure. You know, normally the old timers mined down to about 75 metres. This hole here was only about 50 metres subsurface. So, you know, that corresponds with 4 metres at about 50 and a hole above it where they hadn't mined it out. So look, again, some great results. And what they demonstrate to us is this thing is still open everywhere and we've really only scratched the surface. And then, you know, to touch base on the intrusion hosted, the map on the right, what that shows you there is the footprint of these intrusions as we know it. This is a pretty similar system to what De Grey have got, just a different age intrusion. But effectively, you know, the holes there we've drilled, virtually every hole into this intrusion has got, you know, decent grades of, you know, mineralisation. You know, we've got a bunch of holes in the middle pending now. It's a trend about a kilometre long. It's 100 metres wide, down to 300 metres. You know, simple maths tells you that's a 100 million tonne envelope. And then we've got another one further down here to the south, we think is a repeat almost as big. So look, the intrusion hosted stuff, it's lower grade, can have some high grade. But when you put that together with the high grade mineralisation sitting above it, it's a case of, you know, 1 and 1 make 3. So you've potentially got this really big long life operation, start with sort of a high grade mineralisation. So it's a really low CapEx beast, and then expand as you go. So, you know, look, it's a great project and really we're just lucky that this thing sat there with no modern exploration. I might sort of quickly go through the drilling. I mean, at the moment, 5 rigs on site, we're drilling hole 161 to 165, and we've now reported up to 92. So you've got a bunch of drill holes pending. We've got the assay turnaround time back to 5 weeks. So you'll see a catch up there with, you know, a heap of results coming out the next 3 to 5 weeks. And in terms of, you know, the go forward, we're keeping 3 rigs drilling the high grade and 2 on the underlying intrusion hosted system, because I think it's important that we sort of get a decent size high grade resource out when this resource comes in early March next year. I'll sort of quickly mosey on over to Ecuador, which is a project that hasn't seen as much work as Argentina. And the reason it hasn't, and it was always the plan, is that we've got some fantastic looking porphyry projects here, or porphyry targets. But the reality of a junior drilling porphyries is if it's there, if it's economic and you get into it, you normally get into it on the 40th hole. So the smart way here to add value to shareholders is basically get a couple of million ounces at least in Argentina. We're double the share price by then. We're funded to do it, and then we'll raise, you know, a big amount of money and go and chase these, you know, projects in Ecuador properly. But, you know, we've had some good results. First hole, 134 metres at a gram. So we're on to, you know, a big system, which is effectively sitting, you know, 5 k's away from a 17 million ounce ore body. And these are just some of the targets. I mean, here's some historical holes into an IP anomaly. We spent, you know, almost $1 million doing geophysics. It's just tagged the top of this really big, strong, you know, IP conductor anomaly. We measure the IP response in the core. You know, some of this core goes 2 and 3% copper. So you would imagine that as you get into the main part of this anomaly, hopefully you're getting grades 2 or 3 times higher. And then there's another one here, this 24C, which wasn't recognised. It doesn't get to surface, but when you go and map the top of the hill and have a look, there's all these fractures that are stained blue and green with copper from leakage below. So that's sort of some of the type of targets we've got to drill over there in Ecuador. And really, we'll do some more geophysics here. We'll do a 3D IP grid so we can pin down this target properly before we drill it. You know, one sort of poorly placed drill hole can do a lot of damage, you know, when you're a junior. And then I suppose the wild card we've got in Ecuador, and again, you know, I'd rather be lucky than smart any day of the week. About February, we picked up a concession next door after we got the geophysics back. And, you know, these guys, they're well funded. They're producing about 10,000 ounces a year out of these narrow quartz veins. They started underground. You can see the open pit up there, open pit, and have gone underground. But basically, they've drilled 60 holes chasing extensions. They drilled some deep holes. We had a look at their core and thought, well, gee, why have they only assayed the 1 and 2 metre zones with the sulfides in it? The rest looks interesting. So, you know, we've now assayed the first 30 of their holes, and you're getting intercepts like 150 metres at 0.9, 146 at 1.5. You know, they come from a little 400 metre trend here where they've got about 50 drill holes up in the top left of that section. So, you know, in terms of, again, simple maths, it's 400 metres long, it's 200 metres wide, you know, it's defined down to 400 metres. There's a 100 million tonne envelope. You know, the grade is the big question. I'd love to say it goes a gram or a gram and a half, but we're sitting 5 Ks away from a 17 million ounce ore body that goes 0.7. So why should this be any different? But, you know, you wrap numbers around that, that's potentially a couple of million ounces, which in Ecuador is not big enough. And we get that as a company. But, you know, we've got this CV1 and CV2, you know, much bigger anomalies on trend that had never been looked at until we got down there about a month ago and started doing some sampling. And what we found at surface is effectively, you know, a bunch of outcropping high grade and some lower grade mineralization, exactly the same rock types as we're seeing here in the drill core. So all of a sudden you've got this potential that you don't just have a couple of million ounces, you've got a shot at, you know, 5 million ounces, 10 million ounces. So it's got the critical mass you need. We've got a HeliMag crew that just finished up on site a couple of days ago. We'll process the HeliMag, and then that'll give us a better feel for these intrusions before we start to put some holes in there early next year.
So who was doing the drilling before you, Chris? I mean,
it's a funny situation. So there are a bunch of Chinese and Ecuadorian small-scale miners that have been funded with a combination of Ecuadorian and Chinese money. Their campers, you know, they've got about 150 Chinese. They fly in. You know, they've got their own rigs. They're assaying these things, you know, in their own lab on site. And of course, you know, what we found is that their assays are somewhat unpredictable, which is why we've had to re-assay them all. Yes, and look, there was a rhyme to what was going on. I mean, what had happened is they generally report sort of, you know, the 5 metres at assay around the high grade, they'd report, you know, 5 and 10 grams. And then in the middle, they'd report, you know, 15 grams. Whereas what we're seeing is it's basically a half a gram around it and then a sort of higher grade kick. And they were smearing the high grades around. But, you know, the bottom line is, you know, they'd never really looked at, you know, the broad stuff. And here we are, we've walked into a gold discovery, I suppose.
But how did you get involved, and will they have a percentage of, you know?
So we're earning 50% of what we find from them. So we're earning 50% by spending about 8 million US. And, you know, what happened was basically we walked up to their concession boundary. They've got a gate because they've got a plant and a camp there. We knocked on that gate and said, can we talk to the boss? Who came out. He's a lovely Chinese gentleman. And, you know, we had a couple of preliminary meetings and then effectively went and had dinner, which finished in the typical Chinese thing of drinking scotch and anything else until you fall over, pass out on the table. And, you know, look, 2 or 3 months later, we had a deal done, and they're a really good partner. They've done some high quality work. The reason they brought us in is because they thought they were onto something big, but they just didn't know how to take it to the next level.
Well, that makes sense.
So it was actually smart that they brought us in.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then, you know, look, the other target they again had to find, they did some, you know, some pretty good soil geochemistry to find these 2 big gold in soil anomalies and drilled, you know, some of their holes around the edges of these things. And, you know, look, the reason I think they haven't drilled the middle is because their 200-person camp sits where the letter A is and their treatment plant sits where the letter B is, which is, you know, classic mining. So, you know, any holes that got into these two anomalies have got 0.5 gram, 0.7 gram material, still mineralized at 400 meters. It's exactly the same style of stuff as we see at Cangrejos, which is the 17 million ounce ore body, which sits just up here above the legend box. And, you know, look, we'll get some holes in there again post this mag. And with a bit of luck, we might make a fairly big bulk gold discovery. And, you know, you've got some value to add. I mean, you know, you've got 17 million ounce ore body that's going through permitting, will probably be sold to one of the majors. And we've got the potential to add, you know, quite a lot of value to that as well if we get into something there. And then, you know, look, just quickly to wrap up, how are we going for time?
We are okay, which is good.
Okay.
You know what I'm like. I'm a gold nerd. I need to ask questions.
No, so look, I'll wrap up with this one. But look, summary, Argentina, it's big. It's going to get bigger. 5 rigs going, so you're going to get a bunch of news flow. You know, the fact that you've got the low-grade intrusive stuff sitting under the high-grade is a positive. It's a bit like, you know, Cadia Ridgeway, where you start with the high-grade. You know, 3 rigs going now chasing the high-grade on, you know, the 2 structures we think will add a lot of the high-grade ounces. And, you know, look, open everywhere. So lots of news coming, plus the metallurgy, first resource in, you know, March next year. And then in Ecuador, we still get another 30 of these holes that were drilled for us, but have never been assayed. We're assaying those over the next couple of months. So there'll be news flow. Doing a channel sample down the main underground adit that you know, the Colorado Bee, the Chinese guys put in, where we've mapped 300 meters of porphyry that's never been sampled. So there'll be some interesting news from Ecuador as well. And, you know, I suppose, you know, why do the 2 assets fit together? You know, let's assume we get to where we hope to get to in Argentina. We've got this long life, low cost, low startup CapEx asset producing a strong cash flow. And all of a sudden, if we get lucky in Ecuador, what that means is, you know, we're not a junior with an $800 million CapEx project we can't fund. You know, all of a sudden, you know, funding 600 or 700 million CapEx in order to move from 200 to 500,000 ounces a year is eminently doable. So the 2 assets, you know, together work quite well as well. And invariably what will happen is if we do this the right way, you know, someone else will want to own us, and, you know, we're all shareholders. I've paid, you know, cold hard cash for my stock. And, you know, this is about making money for shareholders. It's not about building an empire.
What a brilliant way to say it, because I always say to a lot of people I speak to, you've got to look at, you can have great assets, etc., but you've got to make sure that the people that are running it have got skin in the game. So that's good to hear, Chris. Question for you is, first of all, has COVID impacted on any of the operations? It doesn't sound like it has. You've got 5 rigs going on in Argentina.
In Argentina, not really. The one impact is they locked down San Juan province, where we are, fairly early. So, you know, the only change has been, and it's lifted in the last couple of days, is that we had the same crews on the rig. So instead of drilling 14 days, swapping crews, we've been doing 10 days drilling and giving them 4 days off. So there's no accidents. So it's cost us, you know, 4 days in every 14, which is not that bad. And then in Ecuador, look, we shut down for about 3 months. I mean, Ecuador did cop it a lot worse than Argentina. Yeah. We're back working now. You know, look, one of the things we had to do, because it was the right thing to do, was, you know, during COVID, and we're still doing it, we provided food packs, got together with the church in Ecuador to the needy 100 sort of families in our local community so that they had food to eat. But look, having said that too, I mean, when you go to permit and an NGO or 2 turns up, you know, that is the best money you can spend, you know, helping the community. You know, we've set up a business with the local sort of women where they're doing our laundry and food, and set up another business with some of the men who we're employing on a contract field assistant basis. So, you know, yes, it impacted the community in Ecuador, but we've sort of helped them through that.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So in the last minute or so we've got, Chris, I'd just like to know, there's a lot of people on this, this conference today, some of whom will understand equity, some of whom will not, but they've got money, they're interested. Why do you think Challenger is a standout from lots of other stories out there?
Basically, you take what we've got now, which is, you know, 600,000 ounces of historical, and if it all goes to plan, it can be, you know, a lot larger. I mean, you know, the aim here for us is to end up with, you know, something that's going to be 2 to a couple of million ounces of high grade, you know, 3 to 4 million ounces of lower grade in Argentina. And then Ecuador, again, you know, in itself, when we get round to drilling that sensibly, it's got the potential to add that as well. So, you know, we've got 2 shots at, you know, multi-million ounce targets here. You know, one of them in Argentina, we're already well on our way.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, it's quick. 20 minutes goes fast. ASX code is CEL. Plenty of news flow coming out. Chris Knorr, thank you so much for joining us today at the Virtual Gold Conference.
And thanks for having me, Kerry. I appreciate it.